Good evening, people. Today, we're going to be talking about a medium that lets people share their stories, their emotions, their life to fellow travelers in time. Yes,
Good evening, people.
I'm talking about movies. Today, we're going to be talking about a good movie medium can satisfy you in a strange way. Their stories, their emotions. It's just strange the feeling it leaves you. It leaves you thinking to fellow travelers in time. It can,
Good evening,
yes,
people.
I'm talking entertain about you, movies, enthrall you, bewilder you, amuse you, or even make you. Just 1 minute. I'm just sorry. But in all cases, it has this wonderful aftertaste which leaves you wanting for more. With this introduction, here's our first speaker.
With great power comes great responsibility. And of course, this particular image is what should come to your mind when I say the word responsibility. You'll realize in the next 3 minutes how the creators of this masterpiece, Spider-Verse, took the idea of doing things differently at every stage and nailed it. For starters, this is not your regular animated movie. This film had 177 animators at one point, which is more than twice than your average animated film. The original Toy Story, for comparison, had just 27 animators. And even with 177 animators, it took the creators of Spider-Verse a week to edit just 1 second of footage. It's no surprise then that it took them almost a year to come up with the 10 seconds of theme for the rest of the footage. Animated films look more and more like real life these days. For example, here's a shot from the 2004 Pixar blockbuster Incredibles. But for Spider-Verse, the creators didn't go with the usual photorealistic approach. They decided to stick to the traditional comic book style. Now, to accomplish this, they used a number of different techniques. The first, and probably the most significant one, is their innovative use of frame rates. Which begs the question, how do frame rates affect the fluidity of animation? Creating a different image for every frame is called animating on ones. And when one image holds for 2 frames, it's called animating on twos. Animated films, well, all films in general, are technically 24 FPS. That means animating on ones. But again, with Spider-Verse, the creators went with something different. They didn't follow a strict 24 FPS pattern throughout the film. They switched to animating on twos where the scene required it. You can actually find the animating on two style in some of the old classic Disney films like Snow White and Lady and the Tramp. But that's not what is so cool about this. The switch was the cool part. When they needed to show that Miles was being clumsy and was basically struggling with his new powers, they used 12 FPS to express that idea because the footage would look cluttery in that. But when they wanted to show that Miles had finally gained control over all his powers and had finally taken that epic leap of faith, they edited him on 24 FPS to imply that idea of smooth movements. As if this wasn't cool enough, they sometimes animated Miles and Peter differently in the same scene. For example, look at the scene of them swinging in the forest. Here, Peter is animated on ones, 24 FPS, and Miles is animated on twos, 12 FPS, to show the contrast that Miles is still learning, he's still struggling, and Peter, as we all know, is already a pro. Talking about things to bring up in regular conversations to make you sound cool, you must have heard the term motion blur somewhere or the other. Basically, it's a CGI trick to make the motion look realistic by softening it. That's all. But the creators of Spider-Verse decided to just skip on it and instead went with an old school technique called smearing. Now, what does smearing mean then? Smearing was used a lot in early cartoons to create the sense of motion. Multiple copies of the same moving object, like hands, drumsticks, or even the Doraemon's helicopter, present in a single frame, creates the illusion of movement. Talking about different techniques, You know how you blur out the backgrounds in photos using your portrait modes to emphasize on your subject, right? But again, the creators went with something different. Comic books have this one common error where the ink is misprinted. The creators decided to use this style to create depth of field instead of the usual background blur. They went with something called half toning. Now, what is half toning? They basically used dots to create colors and gradients like this. So, if you focus on the top left of this shot, you can see how they implemented it. And they created shadows with hatching like this. Now, who knew engineering graphics was actually useful, right? Should have studied. Now, all these different than regular techniques I talked about, of course, ended up giving the movie like no other. If you notice, the entire movie is just a much fancier and detailed flipbook animation. Not only that, there are several moments in the film where hand drawn illustrations are straight up used in place of computer animations. Co director Phil Lord put it like this: if you freeze any part of the movie at any time, it will look like an illustration with hand drawn touches and all. I'm really glad that they went ahead and did things differently. Smearing instead of motion blur, half toning instead of background blur, comic theme instead of the photorealistic approach, and many more. And honestly, I cannot wait for more films to take inspiration from the gorgeous masterpiece that is Spider Man Into the Spider Verse.
Bicycle Thieves is one of those cinematic masterpieces that evoke the most heartfelt emotions from the simplest of stories. This movie, set in Italy just after World War II, sucks us into the significant economic disparity of that time and the men's desperation to find job from the very beginning. Antonio Ricci, one of the many poor job seekers, gets employed into hanging and pasting posters around the city. However, for the job, he requires a bicycle. His wife Maria then arranges the money for it by selling their bed sheets. Richie also has a young son named Bruno who is quite observant and smart. On the very first day of his job, Antonio's bicycle gets stolen. He and Bruno then scout the whole city searching for it, indulging in all sorts of desperate attempts. This classic, masterfully directed by Vittorio De Sica, is poetic, immediate, and authentic. Italian neorealism was a film movement that came about as a result of World War II and became a symbol of cultural change. Filmmakers used stories that showed the vulnerability of the poor working class. Their films became the mirrors of Italy, where the audience saw how, even in their happiest moments, tragedy lingered like a ghost for the economically weaker sections. In one scene, when Antonio and Bruno fail to catch the thief, Antonio takes his son to a pizzeria, saying, why kill myself worrying when I'll end up just as dead anyway? Imagine treating your son with a pizza because you feel your last days needs to be celebrated. Vittorio's other works are also charged with such compelling and tender scenes, acted wonderfully by inexperienced actors. Shoeshine and Umberto D are also stories that narrate the stories of simple men, comradeship, and the troubles they go through because of the after effects of war. Later in his life, he directed some comedies and soap operas. However, he went back to his neorealistic obsessions by directing the Oscar winning The Garden of Finzi Continis. The display of the uncomfortable truth and a deep understanding of the human emotion inspired India's greatest filmmakers, Satyajit Ray and Bimal Roy. Satyajit Ray even said that whatever he wanted to do in movies, Desika had already done that. This paved the way for his debut film Patthar Panchali, which took Indian cinema to the next level. Ray proved that nuanced and straightforward story weaving, even with amateur actors, can put a lasting impression on the audience's mind. The influence of bicycle thieves on is evident in Bimal Roy's Dobi Ka Zameen. Set in a small village in Bengal, the movie tells the story of a poor farmer, Shambhu, who is unable to pay debt to the zamindar. He then goes to Kolkata with his young son to earn money. It has almost the same elements as Bicycle Thieves, the exploitation of the already poor section of society, the child witnessing the horrors of poverty, and a crushing dose of realism. Desika's works and their influence on Indian cinema signify that the laments of low income families and the tragedy of children born in them are shared grief of the world. Their stories, in any country, in any language, will leave the audience with pitiful, moist eyes. Desika once said, I've lost all my money on these films. They are not commercial. But I'm glad I lost it this way. To have for a souvenir of my life films like Umberto D and Bicycle Thieves.
When we think about cinema, we think about cameras, technique, passion, and curiosity. One of the directors who embodied this when international art was just growing is none other than Satyajit Ray, a man who loved movies, who changed the trajectory of Indian cinema, and who is now called the godfather of Indian cinema for a reason. He was known for making his audience feel like they are a part of his film. His infectious passion for filmmaking was his driving factor. He would always capture the raw details of his actors. He would make everyone on set feel what he wanted to convey in order to get the most out of their emotions. He would make actors follow his instructions thoroughly. It was this quality of Satyajit Ray that made him a great filmmaker. Satyajit Ray had won 11 international prizes for the first film he ever made. 11 prizes, that too in that for the first film. This was huge, right? The film Pathe Panchali was done with a limited budget and an amateur crew that worked part-time. Legend has it all that on the first day of shooting, Satyajit Ray had never directed a scene. His cinematographer Mitra had never cinematographed, and none of his child actors had never been screen tested. No one in the movie was experienced, but Ray brought the best out of them. He went as far as selling his insurance and his wife's jewelry to fund the film. The success of Pathe Panchali gave Ray total control over his subsequent films. What followed was a long career as a world class filmmaker. He made a feature length film every year for the next 26 years. Moreover, Ray made his films at a time when technology had hardly progressed. He preferred to shoot in original locations with natural lightings, even though it was very challenging at the time when the cameras were so heavy and uncomfortable to use for long hours. This technique called bounce lighting, one of the Ray's proudest achievements because of its widespread use to date. It's nothing but the umbrella kind of thing which we'll be using for lighting when we go to take a passport photo, stuff and all. He believed that background music played a very important role in films and popularized it a lot in his films. He was always known for the themes he portrayed in the movies. They were timeless, they were evergreen. People all over the world could relate to it, which is why people all over the world connected to the films. He never took a religious stand or a political stand in any of his story, but he rather chose to simply showcase the reality of the time through his cinema. The series of his first three films, so-called the Apu trilogy, had received the worldwide recognition and were also a source of inspiration for so many young filmmakers out there. The trilogy premiered in the young 1950s, long before any movie industry got the idea of a movie series. It took Ray 5 years to make the first movie, simply because he even waited an entire month to shoot a scene the way he wanted. That was so great, even crazy. Despite his ill health, Ray continued to make his films till his last days. He was the first Indian to receive the Academy Honorary Award and the second film personality after Charlie Chaplin to have been awarded an honorary doctorate. He was also awarded the Padma Bhushan and the Great Bharat Ratna just a few days before his demise. The visionary of Indian cinema bid adieu to the world at the age of 71. But yeah, he will always live on. in the form of his contribution to the field of cinema, not just in India, but all around the globe.
Remember when we'd all go to the theaters like this? Vaguely, at least. Well, we'll be venturing into a movie released in the pre COVID era that won at the Oscars, Academy, Palme d'Or, BAFTA, Golden Globe, and Blue Dragon, amongst so many others. I'm talking about the Korean black comedy thriller, you guessed it, Parasite, which also happens to be one of my favorite movies. So, what inspired the Bong Joon-ho directorial? And what made it the exhilarating watch that it is? One of the major influences came from a theory proposed by Alfred Hitchcock, known as the bomb theory. So, let's imagine a scenario where two people are conversing, unaware of the fact that there is a bomb ticking under their table. When it eventually goes off, there is a sense of momentary shock among the viewers. That's the element of surprise. But this is the emotion that's in fact eliminated and instead replaced with suspense. Now, imagine the viewers know that the bomb is there under the desk and that it's going to go off in the next 15 minutes. The knowledge of this fact creates an eerie sense of anxiety, uneasiness, and the unsettling certainty of an impending doom. This is the element of suspense and the emotion that makes for a far more engaging watch. Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched Parasite yet, then just do this for a minute because I'll be discussing one of the segments of the film where the bomb theory was put to use. So in the movie The House Help, Moon Gwang's husband, Gwen Se, has been secretly living in the underground bunker of the Park's house for over 4 years now, hiding from loan sharks and the Parks themselves, of course. Imagine having a stranger live right under your kitchen who has access to your house 24 by 7 by 365 and not having a single clue about it. This is probably what keeps the audience at the edge of their seat the most. And is probably the most significant segment of the movie where the bomb theory was put to use beautifully. Throughout, the viewers are made to feel extremely anxious of all the details provided to them that are kept hidden to the characters that are on the screen. At all times, we're curious and concerned for the protagonists for when and if the truth unfolds. And when it does, oh boy, does it make for a great climax. Another filmmaker whose work inspired Bong's films is Kim Ki-young. Now, Kim Ki-young was also a Korean filmmaker whose approach was highly stylistic for his time. Although directing movies in uncommon genres such as intense psychosexual and melodramatic horror, Kim made use of neorealist elements in his works as well. One of his famous film series, the Housemaid trilogy, portrayed real issues of the society at the time with great usage of symbolism in his cinematography. For example, he constantly shot the characters on or around the staircase in the house, signaling to us that they're a well-off family, as having a double-storied house in Korea in the 1950s was a privilege only the rich could afford to have. Bong took cues from this, twisted it, and adapted it to suit his version of modern filmmaking. May it be Parasite, Snowpiercer, or Okja even. All of his films depict real-world struggles such as class warfare, animal cruelty, and corporate greed. What Snowpiercer does horizontally, Parasite does vertically. Growth and progress were shown moving left to right in the case of the former, while it was shown moving upward, quite literally in the latter. Camera angling also played a huge role in Parasite in depicting the position of the characters in the society or even their mental state at the time. Higher camera angles meant smaller looking people, which in turn meant that they were almost helpless in the situation. Whereas lower camera angling helped enlarge the physical stature of the people, making them look like they're coming from a place of power or authority. Now, let's talk about the Kuleshov effect. But what's the Kuleshov effect? You may be wondering. It's this mental phenomenon that this Russian filmmaker Lev Kuleshov first came up with and proposed could be played out using editing techniques. Yeah, the Soviets do love being first at everything, but I digress. The Kuleshov effect is mastered by using two sequential shots or more instead of a continuous one to get more meaning out of the scene. Kuleshov conducted an experiment to test this out. An actor wearing a neutral expression on his face was shown after showing a bowl of soup. The audience inferred him as being hungry. The same expression was shown after showing a girl in a coffin. This time, the audience sympathized with his sadness. And finally, the same scene was again shown after showing a woman on the couch. And the audience felt that the man showed attraction towards the woman. Alfred Hitchcock was very influenced by the cinematics of the Kuleshov effect and analyzed it through a montage featuring himself, as you can see on your screen right now. He went on to use this in his movies, such as in the 1954 mystery thriller Rare Window. All in all, the influence of other filmmakers on Bong's work is evident, and it definitely led to its success, not just in Korea, but also across countries worldwide. Well, there's so much more to talk about with regards to film movements throughout history, but I guess we'll just do with Chris Evans breaking the fourth wall, just to give me a thumbs up for my run.
Hollywood is well known for being inspired by media from all over the world. One such movie is Japanese director Satoshi Kon's 1997 classic Perfect Blue. This anime was based on a novel of the same name by Yoshikazu Takuchi. The original idea for the production was to be a live-action adaptation of the novel. However, after the earthquake of 1995 destroyed the studio where the movie was to be filmed in, and a decision was reached to produce an animated version to reduce the cost. Perfect Blue is a psychological thriller that follows its protagonist Mima as she struggles with losing her grip on reality. She was a singer in a J-pop group who moves on from music to pursue an acting career. Almost immediately, she is tapped by obsessive fans, her image is tarnished for taking on more mature roles, and mysterious murders starts taking place. She encounters her doppelganger repeatedly throughout the movie, and it's impossible both for her and as well as the audience to distinguish reality from fantasy. To say that the portrayal of themes like perception, identity, duality, and performance in the movie were influential is an understatement. The one who created such impact on other directors is Satoshi Kon. One director to be influenced by his movies is Darren Aronofsky. Darren's filmography largely consists of psychological dramas and the struggle for perfection. The most prominent results of Perfect Blue's influence on Aronofsky's work are movies Black Swan and Requiem for a Dream. Just like Perfect Blue, they too follow their protagonists through their journey as they lose their grip on reality. In Black Swan, the protagonist Nina, a ballet dancer who struggles to embody her darker side in her performance. Through the course of a movie, she has numerous hallucinations and starts seeing her doppelganger. The film also shares some visuals with Perfect Blue, like the scene where Nina rests her head against a window in subway, only to find her doppelganger staring back at her. And so do the shadows, photographs, and paintings of Nina and Mima, all manipulated to represent the characters' identities. None of Satoshi Kon's endeavors were big box office either in home at Japan or in abroad, though his era won him a fervent cult following during his lifetime. Among fans of his debut, Perfect Blue, was Darren Aronofsky, who owns the American filming rights of Perfect Blue, in a view to authoring a live action remake. But that project never got off the ground. Aronofsky purchased the rights for $59,000 to use the infamous bath scene in his film Requiem for a Dream. This movie is based on a 1978 novel of the same name. This film depicts four characters affected by drug addiction and how it alters their physical and emotional state. There's a scene where a woman sits face down in bathtub and screams into water in distress. This is a shot for shot remake of the bathtub scene in Perfect Blue, where Mima breaks down following the release of the images in the Stalker's website Mima's Room. Despite the acclaim Aronofsky has earned, some have also called him out on ripping off Perfect Blue. Well, if you ask me, yes, there are similarities, but they are genuinely different dramas which has their own original visions. I like to think of these movies as a love letter on Mr. Cohn's original vision. These movies are a great promise for more gems to emerge in the psychological thriller genre for the fans of the original anime.
Imagine this. It's 1946. You're a Frenchman living in post war France. Your movie scripts are no longer used to keep Hitler's fireplace going. Wartime embargoes have been lifted, and as a result, the Americans have waived your debt and are sending your country a lot of good stuff. But you don't care about all that. No, sir. Your mind is set on the one thing that they export best: Hollywood movies. You discover greats like Alfred Hitchcock and Orson Welles, and you can't help but notice one thing nagging you. French cinema is far, far behind Hollywood, and embarrassingly so. So, what do? Do you sit back and think, ah, mon ami, it is what it is? No, no. You decide to do something about it. The man I'm speaking of is French film critic André Bazin. In 1951, he started a magazine named Cahiers du Cinéma, which proceeded to call out French movie makers for their uninspired and dated filmmaking. This consequently gave birth to a bold new film movement that would inspire generations of filmmakers to come: the French New Wave. The French New Wave was revolutionary in every sense of the word. It changed cinematic narrative by rejecting traditional TV tropes and bringing innovation into filmmaking. For decades, Hollywood had set the standards for movie making all over the world. Naturally, New Wave filmmakers studied these rules thoroughly and then threw them right out the window. They switched from a traditional tripod camera setup to a handheld alternative, lending freedom to the story and filling it with an entirely new energy. They replaced the traditional unwavering scripts with more natural, mostly improvised dialogue. They replaced the practice of continuity editing with jump cuts. They shifted from sound stages to actual real-world settings. They also redefined how their films moved from one shot to another. So traditionally, what would happen is shot A would naturally transition to shot B, leaving no gaps in between to ensure that the audience could follow along. With the new wave, though, logic became a secondary concern. Jump cuts were commonplace, and soon they became mainstream. Now that you all know that the French New Wave is a film movement and not some weird sequel to the pandemic, let's look at the pioneers of this style. While many directors were quick to adopt the New Wave style, two of them really helped shape it: Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard. Remember the magazine we talked about earlier with the fun name? Well, these two wrote essays for it. Mildly put, these guys liked their movies a certain way, and the French film industry just wasn't cutting it. In fact, Truffaut was so vocal about how the Cannes Film Festival pandered to hollow adaptations of novels, or as he called it, uninspired mediocrity, that they outright banned him from attending. This little French bad boy then went on to make his own new wave movie called The 400 Blows. The French Minister of Cultural Affairs liked the movie so much, he personally asked for it to be shown at Cannes the next year. Safe to say, one of the 400 blows was certainly intended for the festival because Truffaut went on to win Best Director for the movie that very year. This signaled the birth of a new era of films. Jean-Luc Godard, the other French bad boy, was not only a pioneer, but also an inspiration to greats like Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino, in fact, was so influenced by Godard, he named his production company A Band Apart after Godard's seminal movie titled Bon Appétit. Remember how I said the new wave brought along with it a new way of transitioning from one shot to another in the form of jump cuts? Well, Godard was the first one to use them in his movie Breathless, and they've been around ever since. His influence far transcends just cinema, though. Due to dwindling budgets, Godard decided to do away with the entire costume design department and asked his actors to dress themselves. What this did is it inadvertently set off its own cultural revolution in the field of fashion. Godard was so influential, in fact, he received an offer from Hollywood to direct none other than Warren Beatty in Bonnie and Clyde, which he promptly ignored. I take it he wasn't the biggest fan of Americans. While all this seems revolutionary to us now, at the time, new wave directors, plagued by necessity and a lack of studio funding, were just looking for a way to keep doing what they did best. And from that search came some iconic films that changed the face of cinema forever. And to me, that is what's most influential about the French New Wave. It showed directors that they didn't need some big studio backing them to fulfill their vision. They didn't need fancy sound stages. Armed with just a handheld camera and their dreams, Godard, Truffaut, and countless others proved that if you love cinema, then for as long as there is cinema, your legacy will endure. On that note, we hope that our legacy endures in your hearts forever. Thank you all for showing up. Catch you in the next one.